Hey guys, today I'm back in Dream Car Builder, and I wanted to revisit an older video I made. Now, a few months ago, I made this helicopter, which was okay, but it lacked a swash plate, which made controlling it really hard. It could also only fly sideways, which made it look a little dumb. In this video, I wanted to make a helicopter with a swash plate, which should give me a lot more maneuverability. So, let's get right into it. So I loaded up into the sandbox, and I had to clear my design because I still had my stunt jump car that I made last episode. You can click the card up here if you want to see that. So I just cleared that off and started making the basic frame for the helicopter. Now this video is one of the first ones where I actually didn't really know where to start. So what I did is just made the tail, and I mean, it looks close enough. I'll end up refining it later and making it actually look good. Now it was all good except the driver was like doing that. So I added two framing pieces, and that secured him, and the whole thing was rigid. So with a rigid design, I decided to start working on the propeller. So to do that, I just made a static point like that, and then made a big rod going up into the sky. And then just secured that rod with a few poles, and this gives me something to put the propeller on. I also realized the back wasn't totally secured yet, so I added a few more framing pieces in place, and then I added in another one of these poles to give me another point to be able to secure my blades with. So, talking about the blades, here they are now, and what I'm just doing here is making the basic outline of them with framing pieces, and then I'm just tying them all to that top pole, which is going to hold them in place. So now with that, I decided to put in a jet on the end of one of the blades, which will let me spin it up. And in this test, I mean, like, it's good, like, it's working, everything's holding together, but the blade isn't held together at the center. It's just, they're like two separate blades. So to fix that, I just needed to put in two framing pieces to hold them together, and after doing that, the blade can spin up fine. Now, I can't create any lift yet, though, and that's because I have no way of having any air resistance. So what I have to do is put in these panel pieces and then increase their lift coefficient, which is going to let them interact with the air and hopefully allow me to get into the air. So I spun up the jet here, and it's all spinning up fine, but I'm not going into the air. And it's because my blades have no pitch. They have no way of grabbing the air and pushing it down, which is going to allow me to pull the helicopter up. So I need to fix that in a second. Now before I do that though, what I wanted to do was move my jets from the end of the blades, which is how I've always done it before, and put them in the center. And this has a few advantages. The first one I think people really like is that it hides the jets in the center of the craft so that you can't see how it's being propelled. I kind of like showing them though because it's how it works, and if someone wanted to recreate it, it makes it a little easier to do that. So I'm not really that interested in hiding them. Now later on I'm going to have some gyroscopic stabilization stuff going on, and I'm not actually sure if having the jets at the end of the blades would have negatively affected that. I'm guessing it would have, but just to be safe I could move them to the center. So I did that, and you can see it spins up fine. So what I did is increase the pitch of the propeller blades. So I just have to lower their nodes down a little bit like this, and now as they spin through the air, they're actually going to be able to push air down. Now, it didn't get off the ground yet, and it's because it's just too heavy. So I had to decrease the weight of all of the framing pieces, and after I did that, it actually did get off the ground pretty successfully. Now, one thing about this helicopter is that the blades move way faster than my last one. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something to keep in mind, because it's definitely going to cause issues in the future. And after I did that, I wanted to add in a second blade rotating in the opposite direction of the first. Now this served a couple purposes. The first one was to counter the torque produced by the bottom propeller. The Dream Car Builder is a little weird, and the way I have the jet set up here shouldn't create any torque on the body of the helicopter, but I guess just to be safe, if there is a tiny bit of friction, this should at least counter that out. Now the main reason I wanted to do this was to create more lift. Now the Swashplate mechanism is going to be pretty heavy, so having in the second blade should help a lot. So after making sure to properly secure it in place, in this test you can see everything's spinning, but it's not going off the ground. And it's because since it's spinning in the opposite direction, I need to invert the pitch of the top propeller, because otherwise they're just going to be fighting each other and totally just cancelling out. So after I did that, they should both be pushing air down, and it can sort of take off. So what I did next is try to fix the tail, which didn't really work. It still looks pretty bad, so I'm going to come back to that and fix it a bit more later. But what I really wanted to do was start working on the swash plate. Now the swash plate's interesting, so what I'm going to have is a plate that I'm able to push up and down, tilt forwards and backwards, and left and right. And by doing that, it allows me to adjust the pitch of the blades. I wanted to get the top blade ready, because really I only need to hook up the top blade to the swash plate. The bottom blade can just be a static blade that just produces thrust upwards. So to make this work, I just had to detach the front of the blade from everything, and only just have a single framing piece connecting it, so that I'm able to replace that with a rod, and then in the future I could replace that with the swash plate. Now I had a few problems with the blade just not really wanting to stabilize properly. So I had to create this pyramid shape on top of the blade, and then just increase its size a little bit to hold the blade together. So finally I'm replacing those two framing pieces that are holding up the pitch of the blade with rods, and by expanding and contracting the rods, be able to vary the pitch of the blades. So here I'm just going for a quick test, and you can see I can pull down the blades, and push up the blades, and you can see how it varies the pitch of the blades. So here I'm going to give it a quick test. As I spin up the blades, nothing actually happens for a bit, and it's because the top blade has no pitch. I ended up setting it just to be flat. But when I tell the blade to increase its pitch, it instantly takes off and flies up, and it's very unstable at the moment, so it just goes backwards and then runs into the ground. So this just lets me know that Dream Car shouldn't completely freak out when I try to make this, and hopefully everything will work. So now I'm putting in the base of the Swashplate, and now I'm putting in the top of the Swashplate. So that top piece is going to be the actual, I guess, Swashplate, and it's literally the plate that's going to be moving around and tilting and all that. So I put in 4 rods, and these rods are going to be expanding and contracting to hopefully tilt this plate. And the first test wasn't that promising, because it didn't really tilt the plate, and ended up just folding like that. So it's a little problematic that it's not stable at the moment. So what I did is add in 2 of these pyramids to the top and bottom of the Swashplate, and then connected them together with a few framing pieces. And this should prevent the plate from moving up and down at all, but it should still be allowed to freely rotate around that connection point, which is fine because I'll add in the up and down mechanism separately. As long as I got the tilting working with this, I was pretty much happy. So I just couldn't really get it working with what I had there, so I moved down to just 2 rods, kept it as simple as possible, and I was able to tilt with this, which was promising, but it would just fall out of shape very quickly. This mechanism is just pretty unstable, as it would seem. So I tried a whole bunch of things to get this working. One of them was using midpoints like this, and then connecting everything together. And I added actually back in the other 2 rods, but just told them to do the opposite of whatever the opposing rod was doing. So if one rod was expanding, the one on the opposite side is contracting, and what this would do is just allow the whole thing to be a lot more stable. So you can see I'm able to tilt it pretty freely here, and it wasn't falling apart in itself, which was a good thing. And with that looking pretty good, I added in some fake propellers here to see how it would affect the pitch of the propeller. And it sort of worked out here, except the propeller would do this. And yeah, it's not really what I wanted. Now the next thing I needed to do was probably one of the most important parts of the Swashplate, and this is allowing that plate that's completely static, it's basically attached directly to the frame of the helicopter, influence the rotating motion of the blades. So you need some way to be able to have its position and angle be transferred into a moving object, which is a lot more difficult when you really think about it. And to do that, I have these 2 pyramids sort of faced into each other like this, and the top pyramid should be able to freely rotate from the bottom one, but should be fixed to it and angle and all that. So I just put a jet on it to temporarily spin it up so I could see if it could freely rotate, and it can. And I'm actually able to influence its direction and all that, so really this should be all I need. So I just deleted the jet and replaced it with a framing piece since I actually didn't need to have a jet spinning that piece up since it's going to be directly attached to the propeller itself, so the jets on the propeller will spin it up. So what I did is just shrunk down my mechanism quite a bit since it didn't need to be as tall as it was. And I've just given you a test here so you can still tilt it side to side and forwards and backwards. It tilts less, but that's actually okay. I can just increase the amount that the rods are expanding and contracting to make it tilt more. So that shouldn't be a problem at all. And now here what I'm doing is adding in the mechanism that pushes up and down the Swashplate, and that allows me to pitch up the blades and make the whole helicopter go up, or pitch down the blades and make it fall a little bit. Now, I was pretty confident that this design was going to work, so I just sort of went all in and already set all the controls to what I wanted them to be without any testing, and then it immediately failed, so I wasted about 2 minutes of my life because I didn't feel like doing a small scale test. So I had to delete all the rods that I just put in place, and instead did this X mechanism. And what this is going to do is just expand all the rods, contract them, and it should just hold it stable in any position I want. Now the downside is it uses a lot of rods, but I don't really care. There's really no downside to using a lot of rods, so it's fine. Now expanding and contracting here, I realized it was like going off to the side a little bit. And at first I thought it might be because of the X, but it just turned out that 2 of the rods I didn't have set right, so they weren't expanding when I was telling them to. And now it's expanding up and down just as I'd want. So I can tilt it forwards and backwards, side to side, and move it up and down. So at this point, there's really nothing left to do but to put it back on the helicopter. So I just put it right about where I want it to be, and now I tried to secure it to the rest of the helicopter. Now, I probably should have built in the Swashplate to the frame of the helicopter itself, because by doing this, I'm adding in a lot more framing pieces than I probably needed to, which just adds a lot more weight. It's not a problem, it's just sort of an inaccuracy, I would say. But after that, I decided to test it out, and here it's not connected to anything, but you can see I can still move it up and down, and tilt it however I want, so it's freely moving around. And with that, I could delete these 2 rods that were before influencing the pitch of the helicopter, and connect the Swashplate directly to the blades. So in this first test, I thought things were going to go well, and then that happened. So the big problem was that rotating piece I put on top of the Swashplate to allow it to freely rotate and whatever was working, but it was allowing the blades to just freely rotate however they wanted. And I realized it's because I forgot to put in 2 supporting pieces to keep the blades from, well, basically literally just doing what we saw. And once I had that in place, you can see it's staying pretty much rigid. And if I give it a quick test here, just pushing up and down, all seems to be working fine. But when I went to tilt to the sides, a big problem emerged that I was definitely going to need to deal with. So the top part of the swash plate with those 4 rods that are just vertical is swinging back and forth quite badly. It's just not very well secured. Now what this is going to result in is most likely the swash plate just straight up not working for tilting side to side and up and down, because as the blades are rotating around, they need to be influenced very, very quickly by however that's tilted. You can actually see here specifically how this part is swinging back and forth just a little bit. That should be completely rigid. So that's a problem. So I was hoping to band-aid fix this with a bunch of springs. It's never worked for me before by using a bunch of springs to fix something, but hey, if it works, it works. So I increased the hardness of all the rods as well, hopefully make them stay in place a bit more. And up and down still seemed to work fine, but as I tried to move from side to side, it just moved the swash plate in a weird way and just did not work. So surprise, surprise, putting random springs everywhere didn't work. So I got rid of the springs and just had the really strong rods, and it was the exact same problem. In fact, it may have even been a little bit worse, to be honest. I'm not even sure how. So unfortunately that wasn't going to work, so I had to pull the swash plate back out and actually fix it. But fortunately I did know what I wanted to do, and that was separate out the forward-backward tilt mechanism from the side-to-side tilt. And this is going to allow me to secure each of those 2 mechanisms better, and they should not be able to swing from side to side and do what we were seeing. So I separated out those rods and then put them in place here, and then finally put on the top part, which allows it to rotate freely. And it still seems to work. So now what I'm doing is putting in supporting rods, which I was not able to do before, and this is key. Now I wasn't able to do these before because when I had all 4 rods expanding and contracting, there was just no place to put them where they weren't going to get pulled on or pushed against. But since I have these 2 mechanisms separated out now, I am able to better secure them, and pretty much at this point, it was all working fine. Now it kept falling over, and that's not really a problem, it's just because the base of the swash plate is very small, but it wasn't really meant to be big because it's going to be secured by the rest of the helicopter. So I just shrunk down the rest of the mechanism like this, and now it looks a lot cuter. And it can still tilt forwards and backwards, and left and right, and I can still push it up and down. So with that, it was the second time to put this back on the helicopter. So I just got it in position, and then once again secured it to the rest of the helicopter frame. I used even more framing pieces this time to hopefully keep it a lot more secure, and now giving a test here with it not connected to anything, you see it's still able to freely tilt. So basically, this just means it should be able to work fine. So I once again had to delete the rods that were connected to the rest of the helicopter blades, since I had undone that deletion, and then I just secured everything in place. And now putting in a tiny spring, connecting the rotation of the blades to the rotation of the top part of that swash plate, and that just keeps them in check so that as the blade is rotating, it's always pushing up and down at the right time. And now as I push up and down the swash plate, the pitch of the blade is getting adjusted, and it all seems to work, except it's still a little heavy, so I just had to decrease the swash plate's mass a little bit, and after doing that, it's easily able to take off and fly away. Now it's spinning out a lot. I didn't quite understand why it was doing that, since I should have been canceling out any torque that was being produced. So I just started trying a few things. One was making the center of mass of the helicopter a lot lower. Thought maybe that would help. It didn't really seem to help. You can see it tilts at the very end of its flight there. And then finally, just by decreasing the back of the helicopter a little bit, or the mass of the helicopter a little bit, but also varying how I'm pressing the left and forward controls, I was able to stop it from completely spinning out. It still really wanted to. Here I was really trying to make it not spin out completely, but it seemed to be a lot more stable. So just by adding in a few panels to the back of the helicopter and increasing their lift coefficient, now the helicopter is totally stable moving up and down. It had no problems at all. But moving forwards and backwards was still a massive issue. Whenever I tried to do that, it either started tilting to the left or the right or forwards and backwards. It just didn't entirely move where I wanted it to. It always did some weird compound movement that caused issues. So at this point, I was almost certain the problem had to do with some sort of gyroscopic issue, and the easiest way for me to just tease out that it's not the bottom propeller is just to straight up delete the bottom propeller and increase the thrust to the top 2 jets. So after getting that in place and then giving it a test here, now as I just tell the blades to pitch up a little bit, it takes off. And it seems just as stable as last time, except when I try to move forwards and backwards, it still does the same exact thing, where it starts, in this case, tilting to the right, or tilting clockwise. So now I realized what I probably actually needed was a gyroscopic stabilization bar. These aren't like every RC toy helicopter, And basically, they're just going to pull on the swash plate so that while the helicopter, like if I'm trying to tilt forwards, you can see it like to tilt clockwise there. So this bar is going to spin 90 degrees out of phase of the first one, and the effect that this accomplishes is when it pulls on the swash bar, it perfectly pulls on it to counter that clockwise rotation. There's a lot of interesting physics behind that, which I'm not even going to pretend to fully understand. But all I know is it's probably what I need here. So I just put it in place here, and basically all it is just a lot of mass at the end of these little bars that are 90 degrees out of phase of the two blades. And here, this doesn't look like it's that successful of a test. I just sort of threw myself off this building. And for some reason, one of these bars has expanded itself like 2 times its original size. But as I'm moving forwards here, it's not tilting to the side, which made me think this might actually be working. So I just had to secure it a little bit better to the blades. Also decrease the mass of the bar a little bit so that I'm able to actually gain height while I have it on. But here, just by toggling on and off the jets that are driving the propeller, I'm able to take off, and those gyroscopic bars didn't completely just explode out and grow like 10 times their original size. And I'm able to creep forwards here and not tilt to either side at all. So at this point I was pretty happy, so I just decreased the power of the top blade. I tried a whole bunch of things too. One of them was adding back in the bottom propeller, one of them was adding a jet into the back of the plane, one of them was decreasing the length of that bar on top, one of them was increasing the length of that bar on top, but I kept having issues where I just would run into buildings and stuff. Eventually I got this flight though, where I just sort of perfectly got to the top of the building, no problem. And the exact same design, I could not control and ran straight into this building. So I realized the problem was probably not the helicopter at this point, and was probably just me. So I decided to panel this whole thing up, make it look pretty, and then just practice it a whole bunch, and hopefully that should be the issue. I had the same issue with my ornithopter at first. I couldn't control that, but just after enough practice, I ended up kind of getting it down and it was fine. So you can see here I got those panels in place, and now it looks a lot more like a helicopter. And I also was trying to decide on what color I wanted. I always go with red, so I wanted to go with green. This dark green, though, I didn't really like, so I went for a lighter green like this, and that I was a lot happier with. And finally, I just had to set the color for all the framing pieces as well, and for that, I went for a really dark green. I don't know why, to be honest, but it's just what I went with. So I set the color of the blades to be gray. I think that looks pretty cool. And then finally, I just had to set the windshield to be blue, but besides just coloring it blue, I also have to make it the glass material, so I can see inside, and so that if I ever want to go in first-person view, I can see outside. So I went to take off here, and I was a little too heavy. Now I should have expected this, because I added in a lot of panels, and each of these panels has a little bit of mass, so I just decreased the mass of the rest of the helicopter, and I was easily able to take off, but the back of the helicopter now was having some vibration issues, so I just added in a couple more rods to hopefully keep everything stable. And now finally here I'm able to take off. Everything seems stable, and everything's pretty good. So I realized I never actually showed how the swash plate is affecting the pitch of the blades, and it's a lot easier to do that when I do it at 1/20th times speed. So here, if I start holding W, you can see that the pitch of the blades progressively gets steeper and steeper, which allows it to push down more air and lift up the helicopter faster. And at this point you can see the helicopter is beginning to take off. And now I'm holding E, which is the key I used to make it fall down, and the blades are getting less and less pitched until you can see now they're almost perfectly parallel with the ground, and now they're creating no lift, but gravity's still pulling down, so the helicopter begins to fall. And I'm just getting a bunch of height so that I can show you the forwards and backwards movement. And after I did that and waited for a second for the forwards movement to finish, well, doing its thing, you can see the pitch of the blade is actually varying during flight. It reaches its greatest extent on the left side of the helicopter, and its lowest on the right side. And you can see it's actually a pretty similar story for moving left and right, except the pitch of the blade reached its greatest extent on the front of the helicopter, and its lowest in the back. And the gyroscopic bar you can see is rotating almost on an entirely different axis from the blades. And it's doing what I said before, it's tugging on the swash plate and keeping it from tilting forwards and backwards. And here I added a few of the cool shots I got while flying this. So guys, thanks for watching. Here I'm going to show a bunch of the mishaps I had while flying this, which there were a lot of. It's actually one of my favorite things I've made in the game, probably just behind the ornithopter, because that's just a really cool video. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to ask below. Until next time.